Right, so once more this weekend we've seen epic solidarity marches for Palestine happening up and down the UK and in other parts of the world too. Last weekend, one chap in particular drew some attention to himself, and this is a guy called Gideon Falter. He was seen in London in video footage that has gone viral, trying to walk against the flow of the pro-Palestine March in London, apparently trying to just cross the road where they just happened to be marching, being prevented from doing so by the police amidst claims to have been just passing through. He wasn't. He allegedly turned up with a guy that must have been pushing 7 feet as a bodyguard, and the cameraman drew attention to himself and got himself platformed by mainstream media as a result. So what was he playing at then? A bit of attention seeking? Well, less important is what he was doing. Rather more important is why he was doing it at all, and in whose interest he was doing it.
I've already seen you deliberately leave the pavement and walk against this march. You chose to do that.
I was trying to get to the other side of the road.
Your comment about
to get to the other side of the road
is disingenuous, whether you like it or not.
How do you want me to get to the other side of
I
the road?
will quite happily walk you over there.
I'm not trying to go
when you get over there, when you get over there, you'll be able to use the far footpath and go up to the top. So we do it.
That is things, man. I'm not trying to cross the road. I don't want to get right there. There's a big confrontation.
No, there's not, sir.
You can ask them to step away from the front of the van.
I can ask them, but I can't force them. I can't.
They've got their hands on the van and they're on straps in the highway.
They are got their hands on their van, but they're not.
But they're actually, if you look at section 7, which you use on just for oil
But the highway's
protesters.
still used. Everyone else is still
Well,
using it.
it's not because we can't move, and they've currently got their hands on the vehicle. So it's section 7.
Give me one moment.
At every single march, there are thousands of Jewish people marching, many of them in an organised...
Not, what rubbish.
They're in an organised block, in a Jewish block. They are warmly welcomed at every demonstration. Some of them have put out public statements disassociating themselves with what Mr. Falter and his organisation were doing at the last march. So that's...
Let him come back to you on that.
First of all, I don't want to continue having a conversation with Ben Jamal.
Right, so that was a selection of clips featuring pro-Palestine March botherer Gideon Falter. He was taken to task by the police for trying to disrupt the march that happened last week and was prevented from doing so. The second clip there showed his extremely large bodyguard, or apparently his bodyguard, and a cameraman as he was taken aside by the police. This wasn't Falter's first attempt to interfere with the march, as last November, as the next clip showed, he tried to drive what was apparently a promotional van as close to the crowd as he could, forcing the police to step in again. And of course protesters do what protesters did. Even if they didn't know Falter himself, they'll have no doubt known the livery on his van. And the fourth clip is Falter having won his moment in the spotlight, being taken to task by someone, well, a darn sight more knowledgeable and honest in Ben Jamal, the director of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. Because absolutely there are Jewish people in these marches, a lot of them. Huge numbers of Jewish people are as appalled, if not more so, given it's so often done in their name, by the actions of Israel in Gaza and historically throughout the occupied Palestinian territories, and are very much on these marches wherever they are happening. But Ben Jamal also made another comment in another part of that interview he had with Kay Birdie, where he said, people need also to be aware of who Mr. Falter is and the organisation he represents. I very much agree with that, and indeed it is who Falter represents that is arguably far more important than who Falter himself is. And there are two organisations I want to talk about here. I know which one Ben Jamal is referring to, but there is another that Falter is linked to, and it's important they are both more widely known than they are, because it sets out the agenda he and these organisations have in what they do. So let's cease at this point to pay Mr. Falter any more attention. It is, I fancy, what he craves. And sufficient mainstream sources have given him the platform to complain about Met Police Commissioner Mark Rowley and demand he resign for letting people march in solidarity with Palestine. Free speech evidently only extends as far as his own opinions go, never mind what other people have to say. The platform to complain these marches should be banned, all playing into the hard right narratives about hate marches. Why he does that and who he is representative of, I think, are more important than one's self-important person. And the first one I'll come to is the campaign against anti-Semitism, which with a name like that has every chance of really being something that ought to be capable of doing some real good, if it had any real interest in combating the real thing. And given that Gideon Falter is their chairman, with his conduct there, you can certainly have your doubts, and Ben Jamal certainly voiced his. The CAA formed in 2014 and became a registered charity the following year. They rapidly rose to prominence, becoming one of the chief finger pointers at Jeremy Corbyn. They were the ones who coined the chronic slogan regarding Corbyn, "For the many, not the Jew," and were the ones who asked the Equality and Human Rights Commission to investigate the Labour Party under Corbyn to look at whether the party had unlawfully discriminated against Jewish people, which the EHRC did following submissions from the CAA and also the Jewish Labour Movement, the pro-Starmer right-wing Jewish group as we know it better today. The EHRC report itself, despite many mainstream sources claiming contrary, did not, however, find Labour to be institutionally anti-Semitic, that improvements had indeed been made over the previous right-wing dominated regime, that the focus on dealing with anti-Semitism driven by the media had been detrimental to dealing with other forms of racism, and of course it cleared Corbyn of being a racist himself, protecting his right to criticise the report where he saw fit to, which of course Keir Starmer then used as an excuse to keep him suspended from the Parliamentary Labour Party. So actually Starmer weaponised the issue, and that should be the greater concern. As soon as the CAA started on Starmer, though, they criticised him for politicising a visit to a Holocaust memorial, something most of us would actually quite readily agree with. And then the likes of MPs like Margaret Hodge put the boot into them over that, whereas Corbyn, of course, in her books, whilst the CAA were on the attack against him, was alleging that he was an effing anti-Semite. She was perfectly happy to be seen as a CAA patron up until that point. Last year, the left-wing Jewish Voice for Labour reported CAA to the charity's watchdog, citing concerns. Jewish Voice for Labour, JVL, has complained to the charity's regulator, alleging the CAA is not fulfilling its stated principal charitable objects of promoting racial harmony by the elimination of anti-Semitism. It alleges the CAA is engaged in persistent conflation and equating of anti-Semitism with criticism of the State of Israel. This echoed concerns raised by the all-party parliamentary group against anti-Semitism in a 2015 report, which said it is important that the CAA leadership do not conflate concerns about activity legitimately protesting Israel's actions with anti-Semitism, as we have seen has been the case on some occasions. So they conflate criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism then, do they? Well, you know what that would make them then, don't you? And it begins with the letter Z. More recently, though, they've been campaigning against Sadiq Khan's London mayoral re-election, including the posting of a video online. A still of that tweet containing said vid is here, reproduced by the Muslim Council of Britain, who derided it for being Islamophobic. So it seems we've an anti-racism charity prepared to engage in racism itself for its own ends, then. The other group Falter has links to is the Jewish National Fund, or JNF. Now, the JNF is a non-profit organisation which has existed since 1901, and its purpose is to buy and develop land for Jewish settlement. Early days, like 1901, that sort of time, still Ottoman Empire, later British Empire. Britain, obviously, thanks to the Balfour Declaration in 1917, supporting more homes for Jewish people in Palestine. Then, of course, later in 1948 with the formation of Israel itself. The JNF was always a part of all of this behind the scenes, facilitating more Jewish people being able to settle in that land. And of course, since 1967, when Israel took occupation of what remained of the Palestinian territories, to this day, illegal settlements are built and settlers arrive to live in them, and the JNF is still doing what it has always done. This is a far more overtly Zionist body, I would venture to say, and fundraises to carry on this land and home theft as it is all over the world. And indeed, there is a dedicated fundraising organisation in this country, JNF UK, with a big fat slogan across its homepage reading JNF UK stands with Israel now and always. In fact, JNF UK in and of itself predates the State of Israel's existence, having been formed in 1939. And if you were wondering by this point what Falter's role was with this lot, he's a vice chairman of JNF UK. Some other notable names on there as honorary patrons of JNF UK include Tony Blair, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Isaac Herzog, the Israeli president. So as much as mainstream news outlets might choose to platform someone like Gideon Falter, you have to remember that by doing so, they're mainstreaming everything he represents. and this is what he represents. Just what was his agenda at that protest after all? Well, I'll let former Chief Superintendent Dal Babu sum that one up. Cheers, folks.
But I have sadly watched the 13.5-minute clip that's on Sky News, and it's a totally different encounter to the one that Mr. Falter has reported. What you see him doing is attempting to go against the march, trying to push past the officers. And I think for 13 minutes, the officers showed great restraint. They offered to take him to a crossing point. They offered to help him and the group he was with, who were filming, the opportunity to cross at a more appropriate place. So the narrative that's been pushed for the last few days is not accurate. And I think what you see is the police officers acting with great restraint. Personally, if I was police in that march, I would have been inclined to have arrested him for assault on the police officer and a breach of the peace. So I think with all of these stories, it's really, really important that we don't just accept things at face value. And I have over the weekend been asking to see the full footage. And when the full footage was revealed, you have a very, very different account to what Mr. Falter originally said had happened.